Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon where you are listening in from. And I see some of our speakers from the Giovanni workshop, so I know that there's a great time difference here for our participants. This is your host, Jennifer Brennan. I've got 2 p.m. Eastern time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. While everybody's logging in, we'd appreciate your feedback on the 2 optional polls at the bottom of the page. And I see that many of you have already noticed those, so they're in the bottom left and middle of your page. What I'd like to do first is go over a few housekeeping items related to this webinar. First, to ensure the best audio experience, the conference has been placed in silent mode. So if you have any issues or any questions, what you should do is you should enter those into the Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. This works like a chat. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our NASA Online Adobe Connect event catalog, as well as to our NASA Earthdata YouTube channel. These URLs will be provided to you at the end. All presentation files will also be available for download at the end of the webinar. The webinar itself is 1 hour long. 45 minutes are allocated to the presentation and live demonstration, with another 15 minutes for the question and answer period. Something different about today's webinar is that we'll actually have 2 separate question and answer periods. So we're going to split the 15 minutes between the 2. One will follow the first part of our presentation, which focuses on Giovanni-4, and the second will follow the second portion of the talk, which will focus on the Federated Giovanni project. After the speaker has finished the second half of his presentation, what we'll do is we'll then move to the final Q&A period, and then this will be followed by our final set of polling questions. As I mentioned earlier, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions throughout all portions of the webinar, and again, what you'll do is you'll enter those into the Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Questions will not be answered using the raising hand function. It has been disabled. What we'll do, again, is we'll take all questions using the Q&A pod at the end of each section. So what I'd like to do is now move to our agenda. During the first half of our presentation, our speaker will provide you with the Giovanni background information, a tour of the new Giovanni-4 interface, and he'll also showcase Giovanni-4 capabilities and visualizations. After this, we'll move next to our first question and answer period. We'll then start back up with the second half of the presentation, which will focus on the Federated Giovanni project. Finishing that portion, we will then address questions specific to the second half, and then finish with a final set of polling questions. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. DAAC, who is a Senior Support Scientist at the NASA Goddard Earth Sciences Data and Information Services Center, or the NASA GES-DISC. Jim?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone, from wherever you are listening to this webinar. I want to thank you for coming and listening and watching. And I'd like to say that it's been my pleasure to put this webinar together, and I hope that you'll all benefit from it and learn a lot and ask questions if you have any further things you'd like to know. So, the title of my presentation today is Redesigning Giovanni. More data, more plots, faster results. And as Jennifer stated, I am located at the NASA Goddard Earth Sciences Data and Information Services Center, which is at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. So first, a little background. Giovanni, which now stands for the Geospatial Interactive Online Visualization and Analysis Infrastructure, was conceived and created to make it easier for scientists to use NASA Earth remote sensing data. It began in 2003, and the system utilized the expanding capabilities of both desktop computers and the World Wide Web. The system evolved in subsequent years, incorporating more data sets with increasing diversity. A major redesign resulted in the current and also soon-to-be retired system, which we call Giovanni-3. In Giovanni-3, data products are categorized into a variety of data portals, which are based on either the mission or a project or a specific earth science area. And that can be something like atmospheric aerosols or precipitation. And though it has been widely used, the Giovanni-3 system has been difficult to adapt to more new capabilities. And as computational resources have improved elsewhere, it is also somewhat slow. It does things now considerably faster than what we used to call the old method, but it is slow compared to what can be accomplished. The data portal system as described was also cumbersome as even more and more data products became available for the system. So here are some of the design principles for Giovanni-4. And Giovanni-4 is being developed keeping these design principles in mind. One of them is a single data access interface instead of the variety of data portals, which uses faceted search so that all of the archived data products can be found. There's an emphasis on increased analysis speed, which also will enable the use of higher spatial and higher temporal resolution data products. We also have added enhanced capabilities to serve data that is located in remote, which means non-GES disk archives. That will also be touched on in the Federated Giovanni presentation. We want to include the already existing Giovanni-3 analytical capabilities as well as adding new capabilities. And one thing that's been part of the development process is using off-the-shelf software to speed up development of the new capabilities. This can mean things like GRADS or IDL, different Python, and that's something that the developers could tell you more about. So here is the Giovanni-4 interface. I used a keyword search for temperature already, which just to show where you'll see the data products appearing. If there was no keyword here, this area would be blank. At the top are the different data visualizations that are available. Users will select the visualization that they need by using these drop-down menus. So if you click here, you would see all of the different visualizations that are available under each of the categories. Now, underneath the visualization menus is the time and date range selection area. Users will select the time period, i.e. the year and the month and the day, and even the hour for the beginning and end of the time period using the calendar widgets. The time period intervals are dependent on the data set that is being analyzed. The next thing to do is to select a region. This can be done three ways. The first way is to enter geographical coordinates, north, south, east, and west for a rectangular area. The next way is to click on the Show Map button right here, and then create an area by clicking and dragging on the map. I'll show an example of the map later. Clicking in the X on the top bottom that appears in the top right corner will then minimize it after the area is drawn so that you can see the data products below. The third way is to choose a shape, and I have examples of that coming up in subsequent slides. The next thing that you will look at is the data variable selection area. There are two ways to search for data variables. The first is the faceted search at left, which has different categories for data variables. Clicking the box, such as measurements, will display all of the variables in that category. So for air temperature, this is currently showing that there are 16 different data variables. The other way to search is with a keyword. And that's shown here for the word temperature. Okay, and this shows all the different variables that showed up when temperature was included. You can see them all with the slide bar on the side here. Now, once the data variable is displayed, clicking in the box for any of the specific data variables will select that variable for analysis. And you can choose one or many. And if you choose many, you will then get the visualization that you select for all of those data variables at the same time. So, after you've done that, the next thing to do is to click the big green Plot Data button. It's located at bottom right. So imagine yourself clicking the green Plot Data button, and I'm going to show examples of several different of the popular Giovanni data visualization options. The first that we see here is the familiar data map. Now remember that Giovanni will average data over any submitted time interval if the selected time interval is larger than a single time increment for that particular data product. So that means that if the data is daily data and a week-long period is selected, the output will be an average of the daily data for that week. Now, in the case shown here, which is a single month, which for the month of March 2004, the monthly modus aerosol optical, in this particular month, we've mapped the data for that particular month. So it was not averaged by the Giovanni system, but because it's monthly data, it's been averaged by the actual modus data team. Now, the default display option is unsmoothed, which shows you what the pixel sizes are for this particular data. Okay, you can also choose the smoothed option, which is shown over here, and that shows the data with familiar contours. Okay, in either case, you can see the palette shown here. The range for the color palette can be adjusted, which is the same as for Giovanni-3. You can put in a different range, and eventually we'll have other color palettes available. Okay, the next output is the time series plot. A classic time series plot provides a value computed as an average of the data over the entire area selected for each time increment, which means monthly, daily, or hourly in the chosen time period. So shown here is a classic time series for CWIF's deep blue aerosol optical depth in the northeastern Atlantic Ocean. And what you can see here is the map. This shows the area that was selected. And also, I mentioned earlier, if you click on this box when the map is displayed, that will minimize the box so you can see the rest of the interface. Okay. The time series is shown here. So March happens to be one of the dustier months near the Sahara Desert because the spring winds kick up the desert sands and transport them over the Atlantic Ocean toward North and South America. And as you can see, this month, March, had several large dust storms as indicated by the peaks in the aerosol optical depth. Okay. Now note too, one of the days with a large peak is March 11th. Just to confirm what I was talking to you before. So we're going to look at March 11th next. The histogram function allows a statistical look at the data in a map. And left is a map of the aerosol optical depth for one of the dust storm days on March 11th. So you can see here's the aerosol optical depth on March 11th. The map shows that there were several areas of high aerosol optical depth, but it is hard to quantify by eye exactly how much of the area is affected. The histogram shows the frequency of pixels with high aerosol optical depth values compared to all the pixel values on the map. So you can see here's the low values, and here's a peak in the high values, which is greater than 1 or greater. So this corresponds to the darkest color in the display. Now, this shows that if you use the histogram function to compare the same area, you could compare the intensity of different dust storms in the same region by seeing the frequency of the highest aerosol optical depth pixels as displayed in the histogram. Now, this slide shows another example of a type of time series plot. In addition to the classic time series, a long requested feature was a time series that displayed individual months or seasons in successive years. That option, which is available only in Giovanni-4, is shown here. This shows Modus Aqua aerosol optical depth over Brazil. It indicates that the September, October, and November, which is also known as autumn season, has higher values, indicating that biomass burning due either to the dry season or agricultural activities, or both, was contributing to higher aerosol optical depth. One of the things also you can do is if you click on any of the seasons here, that would actually remove the season from the plot. So you could eliminate these three just to look at the values here, and the y-axis would adjust automatically. The next result shows a new capability for Giovanni maps, which is the use of shapefiles. A shapefile is a term from the Geographical Information Systems community, and it stands for a file representing a particular geographic area, or a state, or a country, or province, or even a geographical boundary, or a geological boundary, such as for river watersheds. The first analysis shows the that's always a hard word to say, sorry, ultraviolet erythemal daily dose data product for the longest and most intense sunlight day of the year, which is the first day of summer. This was in 2005 for the Sunshine State of Florida. So the shapefile I chose was for Florida. But the blue pixels here indicate that the UV dose was quite low, which is surprising. An obvious cause might be rain. And looking at tropical rainfall measuring mission data over Florida indicates that it was raining a lot, particularly over Miami, where the blue pixel over Miami down here shows that it was raining at a rate of about 5 inches a day. So it was very cloudy over most of the state, and if you were seeking sunshine and a suntan, you would have to go up in the northern part of the state. A very new addition to Giovanni-4 is Watershed shapefiles. Two of these are shown here as examples, showing precipitation during the same period, the winter of 2006 to 2007, over the Chinese coast. So you can here's the watershed for rivers draining into the Chinese coast, and for the Danube River watershed. Now, such a comparative capability could be something very useful to water resource managers. Note that this data is from the Tropical Rainfall Measuring Mission, which would not show snow in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, which probably is something that happens during winter. However, data from the New Global Precipitation Measurement, or GPM mission, should show snowfall as well as rainfall. The next slide is an animated GIF of a new data product added to Giovanni, which is a simulated chlorophyll from the NASA Ocean Biogeochemical Model. Giovanni-3 had animations, but they had to be downloaded frame by frame and reassembled by the user into an animation. Giovanni-4 allows the direct download of an animated GIF with user options for frame speed. The area shown here is the highly dynamic Benguela upwelling zone in Southern Ocean, south of Africa. This is a very turbulent area of the world ocean, and the daily variability is quite high due to eddies that are generated by the interaction of currents in this region. And also you can see high productivity where the Benguela current runs along the coast. Now we want to note the availability of the feedback button. If something in Giovanni-4 doesn't work right, if there is something else that you would like to do with the system that isn't apparently currently possible, if you would like to ask a question about how an analysis is performed, if you want information about documentation associated with the data, or if you just want to give the developers a nice compliment, you can use the feedback button. The feedback button allows you to send an email message directly to the G4 development team. So here's a slide that shows the area for the ocean chlorophyll data I showed earlier, and this shows you where the feedback button is located. And what is really cool about the feedback button is when you click the button, it'll generate an email message that is addressed to the Giovanni development team. And what is included in that feedback button message, where you don't have to do anything, is the URL for the session that you just completed. And one of the great advantages of Giovanni-4 is that everything you've done will be stored in the URL that appears at the top in your web browser. So you can copy it and send it to other people to look at. And as I said, with the feedback button, if you encountered a problem or something you didn't understand, you can then send that email, make a comment to the Giovanni development team, and they will take a look at exactly what you're looking at. They'll just push that button themselves to see what you saw. Okay, so this is really useful. This is something that I've always thought would be quite useful for education, because you can have a class and you can send the URL to everyone in your class, and then they can click on that button, and then they can be sure that they're looking at the exact same area, generate the exact same time series. Really useful to share your information. And we may be even exploring different ways to utilize social media and that capability for collaborative science. So that's all that I have at this point for the first part of the presentation. So I will hand back moderation of the webinar to Jennifer, and she can get input from the audience.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So what we'll do now is take questions on the first half of the presentation. And we'll address questions probably for about 7 minutes or so, and then we'll go ahead and move along to the second portion of the presentation, which again will focus on the Federated Giovanni project. So I see our first question here, Jim, is could I see with this tool the chlorophyll concentration over the past century?
No, we only have data for chlorophyll from the NASA sensors, and the only sensors that we are going to have in the system are going to be OCTS data, which is one of our Pathfinder data sets we're working on now, CWIFs, and MODIS. And beyond that, anything earlier in the century would be ship-based data, which has more gaps. So we're not at that level of capability. There is some CZCS data that the data provider, the Ocean Biology Processing Group, has, but as anybody that's familiar with that data knows, it's quite gappy, and I don't think it would be something that would work well in Giovanni. So we're pretty much restricted to starting in 1996 with OCTS data, and then moving to CWIFs and MODIS, and VIIRS, which is current with MODIS, and there have been discussions of adding new sensors from Europe, and hopefully down the line the PACE mission, which has just been funded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our next question is, do the choices of data to be displayed tell you if the satellite observations are level 2 versus level 3, or if the data displayed are modeled?
The genesis of the data is actually shown in the data product interface. So when you select either by keyword or faceted search, you will see in the display the name of the data product, what it's from. For example, we have a lot of data from the North American Land Data Assimilation System, NLDAS. So then it will say NLDAS model, for example. If it's from the Atmospheric Infrared Sounder, AIRS, it will say AIRS data. It will also show you the resolution, the time period available for that data set. It's very similar to what you can see in Giovanni-3. That's the main thing that you can see. So you would be able to distinguish it. Now, as for Giovanni-3, most of the data products that we're currently working with are level 3 data products. In discussion, because it's a different kind of resolution, different kind of display, is level 2 support. The system is faster computationally and can probably handle some of the quirks and aspects of using level 2, but it's not something that we currently have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our next question is, question and comment. It's a great pleasure to have your presentation. And then the comment or question is, visualizing PM 2.5 in the air seems locally limited in the Giovanni old version. Can we see the PM 2.5 for overall region in the new Giovanni tool?
We get the PM 2.5 from the US EPA, and that was set up under an aerosol research project. So in order to get a global or regional, larger than the United States area, we would have to identify data providers. And that's not something that we currently do because it's not a NASA data set. Potentially, it could be something that could be produced through a research project that could approach us. And as we've noted before, we do have these capabilities for remote data access. So if we could collaborate, in a funded relationship, because nothing in the world is free, we could potentially add that. But right for now, the EPA 2.5 data was just supplied from the United States, a United States data set.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And I should note, before we continue on with the questioning, that if any of you have an inquiry that might require, for example, further assistance after the webinar or some one-on-one guidance, Jim will have the Q&A log and can certainly follow up online for any questions that have not been addressed, within the webinar itself. And with that, our next question is, can you show me how to use the shapefile for plotting Watershed, please? And I guess, Ed, you need to kind of verbally go through that.
Right. It's actually not difficult. One of the way you can currently get to Giovanni-4 that's easiest to describe is to use the URL Giovanni.gsfc, which stands for Goddard Space Flight Center, .nasa.gov. And if you go there, there is a link at the top to Giovanni-4. And when you're doing the regional map selection, you'll see two buttons. One says Show Map, and one says Show Shapes. It doesn't actually show the shape. It shows you the name of the shape. Okay. So you can then look through. They're fairly self-explanatory. As I said, one was Chinese coast, and one was Danube. And go down through there. And so then if you select a data product to map, precipitation is good because it's fairly global. You can then generate the plot, and that would show you the outlines of the actual shape. That's what I did for the two that I showed in the slide.
Okay, so I've included the link in the Q&A pod, and that was giovanni.gsfc.nasa.gov, correct?
Correct. And then when they go, just a note, when they go to the Giovanni-4 link, then they can bookmark it or copy it and use it subsequently. Eventually, and not too far away from eventually, that will be what you see when you go to just the simple Giovanni URL.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jim. The next question is there any mathematical operator available within the new interface?
I'm not sure what that means.
So if that particular user could further clarify with additional information, that would be very helpful. And then in the meanwhile, I'll move along to the next question. Can I ask if you have any plans to visualize satellite data from third-party missions, for example, the European Space Agency, MARIS, using the Giovanni tool?
It somewhat depends on the data set. We have a certain number of data providers now through Federated Giovanni, and Giovanni is being built. Giovanni-4 is being built with the capability of adding data from other places, not just the Federated Giovanni partners. Again, it's a matter of funding and data disk space and a number of different capabilities. I personally have advocated for a few missions that I'd like to see data added to the system, which are still being discussed. But that's something that NASA can be approached with. And like I said, many of the ways that could be done is to have some type of research project collaboration by which access to the data could be set up.
Okay, thank you, Jim. There are actually quite a few questions, and we may not get to all of these questions during the first Q&A, but I think that'll, still be okay, and we can address any that are, we haven't addressed perhaps during the second Q&A or possibly at the end for those.
Why don't we have one more now, and then we'll move into the second part.
Okay, so the next question is, has the Giovanni web address, web address changed for this new version?
Yeah, it's a simple question. The actual way that you would do it is the first part is giovanni.gsfc.nasa.gov/Giovanni/, and that gets you into the new version. But like I said, in just a short time, we're going to sort of switch positions, and Giovanni-3, because we are moving away from it, it's retiring at the end of August, will be the system that you have to do another click to find, and Giovanni-4 will be the one that you find when you go to the initial URL.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So with that, why don't we go ahead and move to the second portion of the webinar. And again, we should be able to address all of these questions either after part 2 or once the webinar has completed. All right, so with that, Jim, I will turn it back over to you for the second portion.
Okay, our next topic is Federated Giovanni. And I've mentioned it many times so far, and I expect you may be asking, what is Federated Giovanni project? And so I want to remind you that one of the design principles of Giovanni-4 was the following: enhance capabilities to serve data located in remote, non-GS disk archives. And the Federated Giovanni project is set up to allow the Giovanni system to serve data products from other NASA Distributed Active Archive Center, or DAAC, partners. And the plan for the Federated Giovanni project is to have 3 tiers of implementation. For Tier 1, the Giovanni system at the GS disk will serve data that is located on other servers remotely. The Land Processes DAAC, which is located in South Dakota, provides data through this method. Tier 1 data support will be implemented for many of the partner DAACs first, including MODAPS, the Ocean Biology Processing Group, and the Physical Oceanography DAAC. But I want to note that it will only be implemented for certain select data products and not the entire suite of what they have. Hold on one second. Okay. The next step is for some of the DAACs to host their own Giovanni system on a virtual machine, or a VM. This means that the Giovanni system that is located at the GS disk will also be installed on a different machine at the partner DAACs. This is called Tier 2 support. And this allows them to put data on their own disks and serve it through that system rather than our system, which could get overloaded if it's serving a lot of different data sets, a lot of different places. And furthermore, the storage of the data is something that we have to consider and all the other DAACs have to consider. Okay. Now, for Tier 3, which is, I think, the most challenging and the most interesting, rather than setting up the system on a virtual machine, the actual code for the Giovanni system is going to be provided to the partner DAACs to run on their own system. Okay? That way they can run the system independently, put in any data sets that they want to put in, independent of our work here, and they will still receive software updates from the development of ongoing Giovanni-4 development. Giovanni-4 development we expect to keep working on for several more months. There's still capabilities that are being asked for, still some capabilities that need to transfer over from Giovanni-3. So, we keep releasing new versions, and the current version is version 4.13. So keep watching. There will be more stuff to show. Okay. Now here's a list of some of the potential data sets that we can get from each of the partner DAACs. Okay. The LP DAAC, Land Processes DAAC, provides vegetation indices as well as MODIS land surface temperatures. MODAPS, which is the MODIS Adaptive Processing System, will supply atmospheric aerosol data and many different types of cloud properties from the MODIS sensor. The Ocean Biology Processing Group provides us different ocean color radiometry and ocean optical data variables, both from MODIS and CWIFs, and as I mentioned, we're also going to get data from OCTS and from VIIRS. And finally, we're going to get sea surface temperature, salinity, and ocean surface winds from the PODAC to start off. Salinity and ocean surface winds will be coming from the Aquarius satellite and sensor. Now here's just one example of data that we've received from the Land Processes DAAC, which is the MODIS Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which is known by the short name NDVI, and this shows it for Africa, a particular month in Africa. Now we had a nice palette installed so far, which really displays NDVI quite nicely. As you can see here, you can see the green of the tropical rainforest, and you can see the tan of the desert areas, nicely contrasted. Okay, but one of the nice virtues of the Giovanni system is that you can have other palettes. And so this palette in particular actually has 65 different shades, but there are other palettes that are simpler, 10 or 11 different shades of color, which allows you to show or highlight changes in the data or particular extremes, or very high or very low. Okay, and that's one of the virtues of the system. And the system replots on the fly. So when you see a color palette you want to change to, or if you want to change the range, you put that in and you click replot, and then you will get the new display. Okay then, here are some of our current status and milestones. As I've mentioned a few times, we've set a deadline for Giovanni-3 to be retired on August 31st, 2015. So if you're taking notes, make sure you put that down in your notes. Okay. Several data sets, such as the ozone measuring instrument and related ozone and atmospheric chemistry data under that portal that was there before, have already been fully migrated to Giovanni-4. They are no longer available in Giovanni-3. Earthdata, which is one of our flagship data sets, is also going to be migrated soon. Okay, so even before we get to August 31st, some of the data will no longer be available in Giovanni-3. Okay, and as I noted just a moment ago, Giovanni 4.13 was released in mid-April. And so some of our milestones for Federated Giovanni. The collection 5.1 data products have been added and tested. So we have the methodology down to add the MODIS data products. Okay, just last week, the collection 6 level 3 data products were released. So next on our agenda is to put those into the Giovanni system. I think that's exciting. MODIS aerosol optical depth is one of the more popular data products that we have, used in quite a bit of different research. So those will be available fairly soon. Okay. And as I noted, for the LP DAAC, we've put in NDVI and EVI. EVI stands for Enhanced Vegetation Index. And we've tested out some of the, I said reflectivity, I actually meant emissivity bands that are available from them. So it's up to the LP DAAC to actually decide which of those they think would be most useful to add to our system. Okay, now for the OBPG, we have tested OCTS chlorophyll. That's the first thing we put in there. We have been able to produce some plots, and so now we're working on getting that into the full system, and then with that data set. One of the things we're waiting for is a logarithmic color palette, which is something that's a standard type of thing that most of the chlorophyll data is displayed with. We have to implement that, and the OBPG is still wrangling with the various intricacies of reprocessing MODIS data and CWIFS data. So they are looking at a June release for the new MODIS data and a somewhat later in the summer release for the CWIFS data. So we're working with OCTS, and we'll be working with VIIRS data to be ready for those bigger data sets from MODIS and CWIFS. And then for the PODAC, finally, we're working out some of the quirks of Aquarius, wind, and salinity data, and so that'll be one of the first things that we'd like to put in there. So that's all I have today. So thank you for listening very much. And I'll just like to note that this particular background image was kind of neat because it's got some oceans, it's got some dust, it's got some chlorophyll, it's got some land. There's probably a volcano or two here on New Zealand. So I covered a lot of ground with that particular slide. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So since we are running a little bit early, how would you like to address, shall we go ahead and take the Federated Giovanni questions first, or go ahead and address those questions that are remaining from the first portion?
Why don't we see if there's any for Federated Giovanni, and then we'll have plenty of time to finish up.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions regarding the second portion of the webinar? I haven't noted any as of yet.
Okay, that's no problem.
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead and, excuse me, how is Federated Giovanni funded?
Federated Giovanni is funded by the NASA Access Program. It's a 2-year project, and we are literally entering into the second year this month.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Sure.
And then the next question is, can a European provider become a Tier 2 partner?
Not under this particular project, okay, but it is something that I'm sure we would be interested I say I'm sure we'd be interested. I can't speak for management, okay, but it's something that I know we would like to see happen, okay, because the Giovanni-4 system is supposed to be able to put in a lot of different things like that. I imagine that the way to do that is to talk to some of the people here. I can give you names to talk to about potentially trying to set up an extended project. There's probably a number of different ways it can be done, but I don't know one of the best one to start with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And then the next.
Let me add too. I think we want to demonstrate that we can do it first before we do some more. I'm very confident the team that's doing it is at JPL, but we'd like to show that it's working. Thanks.
Okay, so a follow-on question to was what happens after the 2-year project? After the 2-year funding through Access, what happens?
Well, one of the things that we want to see at the end of that is basically functioning systems at the other DAACs. Okay, and so then at that point, it just becomes part of their infrastructure, and we've basically implemented it. So then to go beyond that, I can't see directly beyond that horizon. I was happy to see the Federated Giovanni project get funded so we could demonstrate this, and so that the popularity of Giovanni could persist and move around, be spread out so that some of these other data sets can be put together. So check back with us. I mean, I'm sure, obviously Giovanni-4 is going to be here, and the interaction with the other data sets will persist beyond the project. Adding more other partners, that's something that goes beyond the scope of this project.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Let me see here. Okay, a lot of these have to do, hold on a second here, with the interface itself. So why don't we move along to the other questions so
That's
I can
fine.
be sure to capture them? Is that fine with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So a question from the first section, the first one is, are images of chlorophyll available to lakes?
It depends on the data set.
Okay.
Yeah. MODIS data, 4-kilometer resolution, when we get it, does show large lakes. But that's dependent on the data set. That's not dependent on Giovanni.
Okay. And then the next one is, are there any new statistical analyses available in the new version?
Nothing at this point beyond what I've shown. Okay, so you'd have to describe the type of statistical analysis that you'd like to see. One of the things I didn't show was we have a thing that's called an interactive scatter plot. It is currently in the system. I didn't show it because I've shown it so many times before. But you can actually go in and see the pixels, and you can plot you can select 2 data products and have them plotted as an XY scatter plot, and it also includes a best fit line. Okay, and the thing that's neat about the interactive part of it is that you can change your area interactively, and it shows you all of the pixels that are being analyzed and displayed in the scatter plot. So it's a fun thing to play with. I recommend that you go there, find it in the menus, and play around with it. The more data that's in there, the more XY scatter plots you can generate. Whether or not all those XY scatter plots are actually interesting, I don't know. But that's something that you can try out.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is, do all variables of Giovanni-3 exist in Giovanni-4 and in the same order, such as aerosol index?
I'm not sure if they're all there yet, but the plan is to migrate anything that's in Giovanni-3 into Giovanni-4. It takes time to add the data sets to the system, but the eventual plan is to have anything that's in Giovanni-3 into Giovanni-4. They're available by, in alphabetical order once you've clicked keyword search or on the mission or the project. So that's how you would find them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And the next question is, will the old Giovanni portal still be available?
Not after August 31st.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is...
Well, by the way, I should add to that, I am working on, and I will be working on the next couple of months on tutorials that show how the Giovanni-4 interface works. There are going to be videos available on our YouTube channel. And I'm also showing some of the tutorials I'm doing says if you did it this way in Giovanni-3, this is how to do it in Giovanni-4. And so I expect to keep working on those for a while.
Okay, thank you. We've got so many questions that I'm still
we still have some time.
addressing the questions from the first portion. So for those of you who are asking questions, I will get there. I'm making my way down through the list. So the next question is, does the keyword search require specific keywords, or is it just a text search?
When you start to type something in, you'll see the other available keywords in the menu. So if you type temperature, you'll see temperature, air temperature, soil temperature, surface temperature, things like that. So that will guide you in terms of what keywords can be used. If you type in something that's not there, I think, I'm speaking because I haven't remembered this, but I think nothing will happen. It doesn't have like a Google capability of saying, oh, I think this is what I think you're trying to search for. So you would potentially try something else if that doesn't happen. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So our next question is, let's see here. Using the new version, can we access all variables available in the earlier version of Giovanni?
I'm not sure quite what that means. We generally, the availability of what's in our system is dependent on the release of data from the data providers. So, if currently in Giovanni-3 there's like a version 4 and a version 5, and that we're in an era now where there's a version 5 and a version 6, we probably wouldn't migrate over the version 4. Okay, and that's data set dependent. Like I said, one of the examples here is MODIS Collection 5.1 and Collection 6. We'll probably, for a while, have Collection 5.1 and Collection 6 side by side in Giovanni-4. Eventually, the data providers want us to make the previous collection unavailable because they expect that the new data collection is better. But because of people writing papers with the older collection, wanting to compare the new one to the old one, we like to have some level of, shall I say, side-by-sideness, but we don't want to go back and have 4 or 5 different sets. I'm not sure if that's exactly what was being asked about. If it's about data products that, are available in each subsequent release of a data set, we expect to have, as I've said, we expect to have pretty much all of what's in Giovanni-3 go into Giovanni-4. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is, can we exclude the data from XY scatter plot? For example, if some points need to be removed.
No, only unless they're outliers geographically. Okay, it's an interesting idea. I think it would be a little bit more intense of an interaction than we currently have.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is, can I bring in my own algorithms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because one of the reasons that Giovanni-4 has moved in this direction was toward sort of a longer-term goal of being able to do something like that. Okay, right now that's not something that can be done. I would say sort of the long-term potential is to have a way to put your data set into the system which you have processed with your own algorithm, okay, and then have it served through Giovanni because you put it on a server. Now, what Giovanni-4 currently works on to get the data from the other servers is an OpenDAAC protocol. So one of the ways that I could see this happening is for a user to put their data onto the same OpenDAAC protocol, but there would still have to be some way of contacting the Giovanni-4 representatives or the system and say, okay, I want to add this to the system. That's not something I can describe right now, but it's got this portability aspect, which is something that Chris Linus, who's been the main guiding mind and hand behind Giovanni-4, has put this together to be able to do. Okay, partly because we've had inquiries from users just like that. You know, they'd like to say, okay, I want to process the data with this algorithm. Can I use Giovanni's capabilities to look at it? Okay, so Giovanni-4 has, got this aspect of being able to serve data on remote servers, potentially data that's produced by a user. But there's still a few hurdles to get through before we could do that broadly. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So what I'd like to do actually is give the questions right now just another couple of minutes and then move to the final set of polling questions, and then we can return to some of these questions after that, just so that we can get some feedback on the final set of polling questions. I think that's really invaluable. So I will continue forward with a couple more questions, then we'll jump to the final polling questions, give that a minute or two, and then for those of you who wish to stay on the line, we will address the remaining questions that have been asked. All right, so the next question is, will the data in Giovanni-4 be accessible to other clients for display and analysis? Will there be a web service interface to the data?
Not that I'm aware of at this time, okay, but our data that is being served through Giovanni is also available from the DAAC through other methods, through our Mirador. Much of it is on OpenDAP, and much of it is available from the simple subset wizard. Okay, so you can't go directly into the Giovanni system to get it, but we have much of the data that's in the DAAC archive, the GS disk archive is available through those methods. In order to get it from some of the other partners, you would have to look at how they have the data available. Because we're getting data through OpenDAP from them, they have OpenDAP servers with that data.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is, can we have vertical profile of parameters for 2 to 3 days in one frame?
Could you repeat that, please?
Can we have vertical profile of parameters for 2 to 3 days in one frame?
Not currently. Okay, that's the type of thing that you might suggest to the developers through the feedback button.
Okay, great. Let's take one more question, then we'll move to the final set of polling questions and then return back to the Q&A period. All right, so the next question is, can the Giovanni data netcdf file be downloaded by wget or some automatic scripts?
We had that capability in Giovanni 3. I'm not sure right now how that would be done with Giovanni 4. Again, though, any data that's from the GS disk, you can get, we still, I believe, still have most of it on FTP. The reason I say I believe is that I know the plans are underway to close FTP just because of security and considerations like that. Don't quote me on any of that, but that's currently the only way that you could do it.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So at this point, let's go ahead and move to the final set of polling questions. And after that, we'll give it like a minute or two. We'll go ahead and continue on, pick back up with the Q&A period for those of you who may wish to stay on the line. There are probably like 9 or 10 additional questions that have not been addressed yet. So let's give these just a couple of minutes.
As we're finishing up here, I'm going to comment on one of the Giovanni capabilities that somebody wrote in. One, it was on soil moisture. The user may or may not know that we have some soil moisture products from the land data assimilation systems, both the global and the North American land data assimilation system. And that's already in the system.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Sure.
So we'll give the polling questions, probably just another minute here, and then we'll move back to the Q&A for those who can or are interested in staying on the line.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody. We will now, jump, uh, you know, the remainder of the Q&A, as well as just for those of you interested in downloading the files and have a hard deadline at 3 o'clock, the presentation has been split into two pieces. So you see the first part in the file sharing pod. You can find that in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, as well as the Federated Giovanni. And then I've got the agenda there as well. And if you click on any of those files, you will then be prompted with an opportunity or an option to download that file. And then I should say that this webinar, it has been recorded. It will be posted to not only our NASA Earthdata YouTube channel, but it will also be posted to the online Adobe Connect catalog, which you can find at the tinyurl.com Earthdata webinar. If you were interested in signing up for future webinars, we also have a NASA email announcement listserv for which you can sign up, and then you'll receive announcements for upcoming webinars that we may be holding. All right, so why don't we jump back to the questions. And for those of you who may need to log off, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. We're glad you could make it. And let me try to find my place here.
I'd like to mention real quick, too, we have a, NASA Giovanni has its own Twitter account. We don't get a lot of questions through it, but that doesn't mean you can't submit a question. We get most of our questions by email, but I regularly monitor the account, and I'd be glad to take a question on there.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
So our next question is, what makes a data set ideal for display in Giovanni?
Well, it's one that has no time gaps in it, and level 3 map data is currently the easiest one to display. We have various temporal resolutions now. We have actually iMerge, which is from the GPM, is half-hourly data. So when we've encountered problems, sometimes it's been that there's been time gaps in the data set, which we have to try and figure out why that is, because it'll go in the system, people make a request for data over a certain period, and then there will be a gap, and it doesn't really quite know how to handle that. So the best data sets for Giovanni are probably the best data sets for research use in general.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our next question is, are there any resources that people use this application for classroom setting? So maybe this is in reference to any kind of tutorials in order
I'll put a plug-in. In answer to that, I'll put a plug-in for what's called the Data Enhanced Investigations for Climate Change Education. It's a project that I've been working on with Principal Investigator Dan Zales of SRI. We just finished it up, actually. April was the last month of the project. However, many of the resources that have been built for it will continue. If you search, the acronym for that is DICE, D-I-C-C-E. I have resources for education. I'm actually creating pages. What we did for DICE was we made a portal that had what we call easy to use, easy to understand data variables related to climate change. And I'm creating web pages that have links using the URL capability of Giovanni-4. I'm creating a search for just that particular data product. And those will be links on the DICE pages. So that's one way of doing it. He has several, on his website for DICE, he has several examples of classroom projects that have been developed by teachers using Giovanni. That's one of the reasons that I'm working on the tutorials that show how to do something in Giovanni-4 that you did in Giovanni-3 before. Because teachers may have this project, okay, I set it up for Giovanni-3, I want my students to be able to do this, so you'll have to watch a 5-minute tutorial on how to do, make a map with Giovanni-4. So those are some of the things that we have. I believe sort of over the years, there's been other websites and tutorials and demonstrations that have been developed using various versions of Giovanni that you can find as well.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Our next question is, will the Giovanni tool visualize SMAP data?
We don't currently have that as a partner. That doesn't mean we can't. That just means we have to be set up to work with the SMAP data.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. The next question is, what does data migration from Giovanni-3 to Giovanni-4 mean exactly?
Basically means that we have the data in a certain place in our system where it's accessible to the Giovanni-3 system, and we have to set it up so that the Giovanni-4 system knows where to look for it and find it and use it. Okay, and so the Giovanni-3 system, I think there were 4,000 plus different, that could be high, but I know it was in the thousands of data variables, all existing on disk somewhere in the DAAC. And so they all had addresses and locations, and those have to be set up so that the Giovanni-4 way of finding the data and using it can find them.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can this system use UA-SAR data?
If UA-SAR is probably synthetic aperture radar, I don't think so. It's not set up for image type data. I mean, it generates images from pixel data. The only thing I'll say is that I think we had a prototype of using true color image data that didn't really go very far or get much use. So it doesn't mean, I'm not going to say it can't, but it's not something that's in our design right now.
Okay. Thank you. So the next question is, what kind of satellite data will be provided by Giovanni after MODIS? What about VIIRS or Discover satellites?
VIIRS, we're going to, like I said earlier, we're going to have ocean color data products from VIIRS. Getting the atmospheric data products would require them to be located with a partner. Because I mean, one of the reasons we get VIIRS ocean color data products is that the OBPG is getting VIIRS data products. OBPG is the Ocean Biology Processing Group. So in order to get data for other projects or missions, we would have to have it available to us sort of through a cooperative agreement. I will say, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of it, we've been designated as a data site with focus on ozone data and other atmospheric chemistry data. And so most of the data sets under that project will be available through Giovanni-4, just because we've been a designated data center for that. Our management can remind me of what we're called under that program, but I don't remember the name.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is there a higher resolution, more than 1 degree, in Giovanni-4?
Yeah, it depends on the data set. I know we have quarter degree data sets. The ocean color data will come down to both 9 kilometer and 4 kilometer. I can't speak for other ones, but there's a variety of resolutions.
Okay, great. So it's very much data set dependent.
Absolutely.
The next question is, should all the data plotted be considered as validated, or do we need to validate it through ground stations?
We get the data from the data provider, and the data provider has its validation protocol. So if it's published by them or released by them, then it's validated to their extent. There is some discussion of one particularly popular data product was the TRIM real-time data product. Because it's labeled real-time, it doesn't have the same processing levels and data QA/QC on it. So that would be validated to the extent that that real-time data product is validated. So it's another one of those things. We have data given to us by various data providers. You have to do a little more digging to determine what they have said about the data that we have in the system. We don't put out anything by ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And the next request actually is a request for your email address, which is the james.g.acker@nasa.gov.
Right.
Okay, I will send that out to everybody. Moving along, is there a way to animate 24 hours of MODIS images to make it look as if we are orbiting the Earth? Can this, or has this been automated?
No, we can't do that. That's a little bit more image processing intensive than we can do. I mean, you can display an animation of the global MODIS data, but as a flat map, not like orbiting around it. You'd have to. I mean, you can get the flat maps and put them into whatever displays them on a globe, but we can't do that.
Okay, thanks, Jim. The next question is it possible to zoom in beyond seeing all of the USA?
I'm not sure. You can zoom in on much smaller areas in the USA. The shapes are for states, and you can literally, with geographical coordinates, if you can't do it with the cursor, go down to a single pixel of whatever size is in that data set. The zoom itself may not go lower. I haven't tested that map.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The next question is, well, do you have the URL for the DICE project that you referenced earlier? Do you know it off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I believe that the DICE set up by the PI is dice.sri.com.
Okay.
And then on our site, you can search, just put into our search box on our homepage, DICCE, and you'll find most of that stuff. The tutorials are available on our website, on our YouTube channel. The older tutorials I actually have links to in some of our DICE resources here at the DAAC.
Okay, and so this question comes from Dr. Singh from your Giovanni workshop.
Okay.
My understanding. So could you follow up with him offline with this information?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is there a paper describing the internals of the Giovanni-4 architecture?
Not yet, partly because I think it's still in development. The person to produce that would be Chris Linus, and Chris has moved up to a new job, so he may not get to that for a while. They said he's going to be busy. But I think it'd be useful. It's not something that has been done yet. I believe, though, there are a couple of different presentations available at meetings that have talked about sort of the generalities. That's all.
Okay. And the next question is, can we download NetCDF data?
Yep, absolutely. That is the standard output for anything from Giovanni-4. It's actually the standard input for anything from Giovanni-4, though it does handle other formats. But everything that you get as a download, everything as a data set that you produce as a result is in NetCDF. Good question.
Okay, wonderful. The next question is, how many users can you serve concurrently?
I don't think we've tested it that far. One of the reasons for emphasizing system speed is so you can handle a lot of users, so they get their results quick, get to the front of the line, get their stuff. But I don't think we've ever decided to see how many we could handle at one time. One of the ways to do that is they have a big class somewhere and have them all try and do it at the same time. So maybe we'll set up a seminar sometime and see how many people we get.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Are there any further questions?
I want to thank everybody. Those were great questions. I'm glad that last one came up about NetCDF. It's a good one. I may add one final thing in that I didn't actually point out, but in the map output, there are two capabilities. The standard image output is a PNG file, but it also has a GeoTIFF capability. And I know that I've always tried to emphasize things that were asked for quite a while. One of the things that was asked for out of Giovanni 3 was a GeoTIFF, something that was geographically mapped that you could put into GIS. And so Giovanni 4 has that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Are there
Sure.
any further questions? Are there any questions that I may have missed? Hoping that I caught all of them. There was a question from one user, although I did answer it, but you can feel free to add to this. And the question was whether or not one needed to download any software in order to be able to use Giovanni. And
No.
It's a web-based tool, and there's no need to download anything.
Yeah, that's what we were bypassing. But like one person who's asked about making a map of an orbiting Earth or something like that, you would have to use additional software for.
Right. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, what I'll do is I'll leave the meeting room open for the next 10 minutes or so for those of you who might be interested in downloading the presentation files. However, if there are no further questions, we will log off from the telecon. And so you will no longer hear audio, but please feel free to enter any comments or additional questions you might have into the Q&A pod. And again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank you, Jim, for your presentation. And
thanks again. So long and good computing.
All right, thanks everybody. We're going to go ahead and log off the telecon at this point. But I will leave the room open. All right, goodbye now.